I recently watched the movie called Redeeming Love with my wife, and I know after watching some reviews of this movie from other Christian YouTubers and people online that there's a lot of controversy around this movie, mainly because of all the sex scenes that are provided. And I gotta admit, I was a little surprised that there were so many sex scenes. I didn't know that it would be like that when I first started watching this movie, but that's not really the focus for me in this video review that I'm doing. What I'm gonna do in this video, rather, is talk about what this story is hitting on in the hearts of women, because it's obviously resonating with a lot of women. The book sold over 3 million copies, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes here. But having said all of that, if you do decide to watch this movie, I would highly recommend that you have your remote control with you, because there are a few scenes that, in my opinion, were unnecessary and way too graphic, especially since it's PG-13 and supposed to be modeled after this Christian book. So, having said all that, I was really interested in watching this movie because about 10 years ago, my wife and her friends read the book Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. And after they read it, like many of the women who read this book, they were basically just raving about the main character, Michael Hosea. And I remember my wife at that time, we've been married for 14 years, so we were already married at that point, but she had read it with some of her single girlfriends, and they were just saying, man, I wish I could meet a guy like Michael Hosea. And ever since that point, I've always wondered, what is it about this character that women love so much? After 3 million copies sold, something in this book and this movie is tapping on something core in a woman's heart. I know some men probably read the book, but obviously it's mostly women. And I know not every woman loves this story and that all women are going to be captured in these 5 points I'm going to make in this video. But having said that, I am going to talk about 5 things I noticed and kind of crystallized for me and maybe even learned about the desires of women after watching this movie based on this book, Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. The first thing I learned about women after watching this movie and learning more about the story in this book is that, number one, women want a man who loves them unconditionally, but these men don't actually exist in reality. Now, I have to say, once I watched this movie and I learned about the story that everyone loves so much in this book, I was pretty shocked. It was not what I thought it was gonna be. It was not your typical love story. So just know in this video, you're going to get some spoilers. So if you wanna watch the movie or read the book, maybe pause this and come back later, because I am gonna tell you what happens in the story. So in summary, the main female character, Angel, loses her family at a young age. She's basically abandoned. And she gets caught up in basically the sex industry. She gets raised in a brothel, and men abuse her from an early age. And as she gets older, she becomes a prostitute, and then, basically chooses the life of prostitution, even though during that time she's still getting abused by men. So it's a story of abuse where it wasn't her fault, and then she starts making sinful choices and also still keeps getting abused by men. And then one day, all of a sudden, this main character, Michael Hosea, comes into the story, and basically God tells him to marry Angel before he even gets to know her. And he just says, I feel like God's telling me that's my wife. And then the rest of the movie is him pursuing her and her healing journey after that. And if this sounds a bit familiar, it's probably because this book and this movie are modeled and kind of like characterized after the book in the Bible of Hosea. since, Michael Hosea, see what she's doing there. But so it's in the book of Hosea, God tells the prophet Hosea to marry a prostitute, and he does that to symbolize how faithless Israel is treating God and how God relentlessly loves Israel, even though she's unfaithful to him. And God is, characterized in the actions of Hosea. And so in this movie, you see that Michael Hosea is modeling after God. And this idea of Michael Hosea modeling after God is expressed in an extreme way in this story that shocked me. So the scene that the first point comes out of is that, so after Michael marries Angel, she rejects him for a while. She doesn't want anything to do with him. She finally gets abused severely enough in the brothel to basically say, okay, I'll go with you because I have no other option. And after she heals a bit and things kind of are going well, she goes back to her life of prostitution. She turns away from her husband, runs away, and in the process, she also has sex with his brother-in-law. And then after that, she eventually comes to her senses again, repents. Michael forgives her and just brings her back. So after that scene, I'll be honest about my reaction, because I obviously give a lot of relationship advice to single women. And after I watched all of that, a part of me was honestly sad, because this character is unrealistic. This is not the way a good man would treat a woman in this type of situation. A perfect man who had a perfect heart and had no sin in his life may be able to do what Michael Hosea did. But the fact is, this type of guy doesn't exist in reality. This is impossible because men have wounds. Men crave respect. Men could not be able to do what Michael Hosea did in a realistic way. And at least in the fashion that he did it so quickly and bam, never had any flaws basically in this whole process. But then I remembered what this whole story was supposed to be about. If you're reading it in context like it's supposed to be read, really this again is modeling God. And that's why I'm saying these men don't exist, because Michael Hosea is based off of God, not real men, even good men. And so this character in this story, if you view it through the lens of an analogy of how God treats his people, could be edifying and wow, I'm seeing God's love in a new way. But if you were gonna watch this movie or read this book and then walk away thinking, wow, there's guys out there that could do this, or I'm gonna wait until a guy's just like that, then I feel like it's damaging, because this is totally unrealistic. No one's ever going to be able to act the way that Michael Hosea acted. Now, of course, please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying we just have the right to be unforgiving or we shouldn't try to be like God. We should. This is a great model to follow. Christ, a husband should represent the love that Christ has for the church, and a wife should seek to respect her husband like the church is supposed to be doing for Jesus. But it's not going to happen in this perfect way that this character, Michael Hosea, was able to exhibit in this extreme situation. And that's the other thing that really came into my mind when I was watching this part of the movie, is that Francine Rivers does a great job of creating a situation that highlights the desires of what a woman would want. So as I kept thinking about these scenes, I kind of came back to my senses and I was examining, is this what women think can happen in relationships? What's happening here? I'm so confused. I can't imagine. I just didn't expect this to be the movie that women love so much, in this book that women love so much, because Angel just acts in ways that I hope women know you can't treat a man that way. And then I, kind of came to my senses, and I'm like, the women aren't admiring Angel, they're admiring Michael. And so what's happening here is that the extreme nature in which Angel betrays Michael gives Michael the opportunity to show the readers and the watchers an extreme example of unconditional love. And so that then touches on a woman's desire to be loved unconditionally, because again, the women obviously aren't being like, yeah, I can act this crazy way like Angel did and expect a man to still want to be with me and, all that. Rather, they're saying this man showed this unconditional love, and I want a man like that. Angel does the worst thing women could do to a man, because women, even if they couldn't verbalize it, they know instinctively that there's a few things men crave. They crave loyalty, they crave respect, and they value sex. Men, it's something that men really care about. And I'm not saying that's all bad. In marriage, it's an important part of a way that a man receives love. And so instinctively, when you read what Angel does to Michael, you know that's basically the worst thing you could possibly do to a man that's loving you, because with one swell swoop of going back to prostitution and sleeping with his brother-in-law, she basically just did like the worst possible thing she could do and just knocked out respect, knocked out loyalty, knocked out sexual, dedication to her husband. And so it sets up the stage for the extreme unconditional love that Michael then offers her. So big picture, this story is a great example of God's love, but it's not a great example of human love, because it's not realistic. Every woman craves perfect unconditional love, just like every man craves unconditional respect from a woman. But we have to submit to the truth that we are fallen creatures. And if we're looking for these perfect people that act in these ways that are displayed in Hollywood, then that's not going to turn out well, because we're all wounded too. In the story, basically, we're all Angel. None of us are Michael Hosea, God's Michael Hosea. But that doesn't mean we can't seek to live up to that standard. I would want to be a man like Michael Hosea. I know I'm not going to be, but I see in him qualities that my wife would value in me, and I want to be that, because ultimately it's reflecting God. And so, as men, if you're watching this, just know that a woman wants you to love her unconditionally, even after you see the ugly parts, the flaws, the areas in her past, which we'll talk about in a little bit. When she shows you that, that's when she'll know that you really love her. Because, yeah, we can all love a woman that seems like a perfect person, but what happens when you see the ugly parts of her? And if you still love her, that's when she knows you're a different type of guy. Number 2, a woman wants a man who chooses her and is able to lead her, but is not trying to dominate her, and also gives her the choice to follow if she wants to. So in the story of Redeeming Love, Michael Hosea is praying in a church, and he's praying for a wife. And then again, all of a sudden he gets this vision and moment of clarity where that's the woman for him. And throughout the rest of the story, he just relentlessly pursues Angel, and he chooses her basically before he even knows her. And she keeps rejecting him. Even after they get married, she, like I said before, rejects him and goes back to a life of prostitution. And there's this one scene where she leaves him after he's been good to her, and he's like, wait, he finds out she's leaving and he chases her down, and she's about halfway back to town where her brothel is, and he basically tells her, look, that way is a life of pain and abuse and people who don't love you, and this way is home. And then she's cold and he gives her his coat, and then he says, the choice is yours. I'm going home. I want you to come home, but you have to decide for yourself. And this scene, again, sets up an example where it's an extreme example, and it does that so it hyper focuses on the desire of a woman to be chosen, but also given the freedom to choose back, basically. He chose her, but then he gave her the freedom to choose him. And so he was a strong leader. He was choosing her, but he didn't make her submit, and he didn't dominate her and make her follow. And that's a really important thing to highlight here, because one issue that a lot of people have with Christianity and relationships is the idea of a woman submitting. More specifically, the wife submitting to the husband. And when you look at that verse in context in Ephesians 5:22, where it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands." Now notice who that was directed to. It didn't say, "Husbands, make your wives submit." It said, "Wives, submit to your husbands." And that's the truth that this movie is displaying. It's got to be her choice. A man can't make a woman submit, and she doesn't want a man who's going to try to make her submit. She wants a man who chooses her, leads, is doing his part, and then gives her the freedom to follow and do her part without him dominating her. Another thing in this movie that taps on the desires in women's heart is that Michael expresses his interest first. And again, this is an unrealistic, I'm not saying you should model after this story. It's a fictional story, but these scenarios create the situation where we can then pinpoint the desires in women that these scenes are hitting on. And one of those desires is the desire for the man to initiate and risk rejection. And as you watch this movie, Michael keeps pursuing and she keeps rejecting. He keeps pursuing and she keeps rejecting. And he even buys time with her at the brothel when she has no interest, and they don't have sex, and he just keeps pursuing and she keeps pushing him away. Now, what I do want to say here is that this is wow, women love this story, and they're this man just keeps pursuing, and I love that. But if this happened in reality, the man doing this would probably be in prison, okay? This would be restraining order type of stuff. So when there's a disconnect here between this fictional story and what women find creepy. So when a guy just can't take a no, he walks the line of being a creep and crossing healthy boundaries if he keeps pursuing because the woman told him no. So please, women, as you watch these types of movies and read these types of books, just know that there's a disconnect there between reality and how most women treat men. They don't want them, they want them in their heart to be relentless pursuers, but the way they then do that would be not healthy. So big picture, men and women here, is that a woman wants a man who relentlessly pursues. Don't follow the literal path that Michael Hosea took, because again, that would be unhealthy, but we can see this desire for a woman to want a man to pursue like that, to be strong, stable, not deterred, not going to be scared off when she gets scared, not going to stop calling because she is playing, playing into her fears and basically testing the man by not responding right away. What's he going to do? Is he still going to pursue me if I don't do that? I'm not saying all that's healthy, but when a man pursues and isn't deterred when she seems a little uneasy, it puts her at ease. I've noticed that when men are confident and when men feel secure about pursuing the woman and they're yeah, this is the one I want, that often then puts her at ease and is okay, I love that he wants me so clearly. But when the guy is I'm kind of nervous, I don't know, I'm not sure, that then makes the woman scared and skittish and kind of runs away because she doesn't want to get hurt. Number 3, a woman wants a man who doesn't care about her past. So a big theme throughout this book and movie, Redeeming Love, is this fear in Angel, rightfully so, that she feels like she's not good enough for Michael and that he deserves someone pure and that he won't be able to look past all the sexual sin and all the problems and things that weren't her fault, all the abuse and the things that were her fault when she fell into sin herself and made bad choices. She's just like, I can't understand how you could see past my past. And so throughout the movie, Michael says things like, I don't care what you've done, or I just care about who you are now. I know that's not who you are anymore. And, I just don't care about all that. And after years of working with women, specifically in regards to relationships, I know that many Christian women can identify with this fear because some of them have gone through a period of rebellion where they've had sex with men, lots of sex with men sometimes, and they're really afraid of telling a Christian man about this part of their past, and then they feel like no Christian man will ever want them because of what they've done already. And so basically they respond in two ways. They either just try to pretend to be the perfect person that they're really not, or they just avoid Christian men altogether because they don't want to be exposed to being rejected by these types of guys. And so it's not hard to see why this character, Michael Hosea, is such a breath of fresh air and that women identify and love so much, because he is not that type of guy. He has the ability to see past her issues in her past and really just tells her, I don't care about that. I love you for who you are now. And so if he could do that for a woman with her past, then obviously, it gives women hope that a man could do that for their past. And again, more than like modeling one's life after this story, I, again, understand and believe that women aren't saying like, yeah, this is I can do this and a man should be able to do that. More so, this extreme story, again, pinpoints, it gives an extreme example of the main general desires that all women and men have. And again, one of these desires in women is to not be judged by their past. Another trait that I believe women really love about the character Michael is his ability to see and parcel out basically the abuse that has occurred to Angel that wasn't her choice. Like, as a child, obviously she did nothing wrong by being raised in a brothel and by being taken advantage of. Those were things that happened to her, not things that she chose. And so he fully understood that. But he also then understood that the things that happened to her that weren't her choice also then affected the choices she made as an adult. He understood that, yes, she was making bad choices at certain points. And again, even, as a adult woman, she was still being abused, which wasn't her fault, and still being manipulated, which wasn't her fault. So I'm not saying like all of that was her fault, but some things in the story, she just made really bad choices because she was so wounded, because she had been abused so much. And, because she's sinful, right? Like every other human. But there's this connection in the story of understanding that one's abuse that happened to you then often affects the things that you choose to do. And that doesn't minimize the sin, but it does help explain it. And it helps to see that this isn't what this woman really wanted. She didn't want to be a prostitute. That wasn't her deepest desire. Even though she kept going back to prostitution, Michael knew this isn't what you really want. You're just doing that because you've been abused and beaten down and, brainwashed to think that's all you're worth. And so that quality in this man to see the wounds and how they have affected her choices is something that women admire in him, because that is a mature way to act as men and women, to understand that there's always a reason behind the sin. There's always a issue that's going on, and it doesn't excuse the sin, but it does help us to understand that there's more than these just bad choices that this person made. And a woman wants a man who can compassionately take the whole story into account and see past her bad choices, and then to say, you're trying to live for Christ now. Christ has redeemed you. I see you for who God has made you to be. And that's what women want, and that's what men want too from women. But again, we need to come back to the big main overarching theme of this story, which is that this is actually a reflection of God. Because while that should be our focus as men, to see women through the eyes of Christ and his grace and gospel rather than just their choices, and vice versa, women should look at men that way if they're following Christ, we have to remember that we can't do this perfectly, and that there are some healthy boundaries that we would be crossing if we were to just completely ignore someone's past, because the past does say something about their character level in some instances. For example, let's take it from the woman's perspective. Let's say a man was abusive towards women, and maybe 10 years ago he abused someone badly, a woman badly. And now 10 years of repentance, he's a Christian now, he's changed. You still should consider that, right? That's not something, you may just not be okay with that. Even though he's changed, he's repented, you just may be like, I just don't feel comfortable getting into a relationship with a man who has that type of past. And likewise, if a woman's slept with hundreds of men or has, cheated on men in her past and now she's living for Christ, it's not crazy for a Christian man to be like, I'm just uncomfortable getting into a relationship with someone who's had that in their past. Again, as Christians, we should forgive and we should view everyone through the eyes of Christ, but it's just not so simplistic as this movie makes it out to be in real life. And again, this is ultimately about God, right? It makes sense that God will unconditionally treat us by the work and atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ and just not count our sins against us at all. And God can do that because he's perfect in every way, and none of us are God. No one's going to be able to do that perfectly like God or like this character, Michael Hosea. But having said all of that, it is a great reminder and lesson for us to attain to be like that, to do that to the best of our ability, to be a gracious person in relationships. And if someone's truly repented and walking in Christ's grace, to apply the gospel to that situation and see the purity of Christ on someone. And if a man can do that for a woman, she's going to love him for that. And vice versa, when men have a woman that can do that for them as well. Number 4, women want a man who loves her for more than the sex that she can offer him. So in the beginning of Michael's pursuit of Angel, he buys time at the brothel, and the first way he's able to interact with her, he sees her on the street but doesn't get to talk to her. And then to get to talk to her, he goes to the brothel and pays for her time like other men do, but the other men were doing it so they could have sex with her. He, on the other hand, just goes into the room and just wants to talk to her. And she's like, what are you doing? I know why you're here. And he's like, will you marry me? And he just goes for it right away and wants to just talk to her. And so he does that a few times at the brothel. And then once she does finally give in and marries him, for the first period of the story while they're married, he doesn't instantly try to sleep with her. She thinks this is why he married her, so he could just have sex with her all the time. But right from the start, he doesn't do that. And so he starts basically wearing her down with his kindness, and she starts seeing him in a different way. And she keeps using these phrases I owe you, or come on, you deserve this. And so in the beginning of their marriage, she still had this mindset of using sex as a currency to pay off her debts to Michael. And it's not hard to see why, right? Because she was in prostitution, and sex for her was like currency. That's how she made money. That's how she made deals. And so Michael didn't want to have sex with her until she understood that he loved her for more than the sex that she could offer. And so even when they were married, he would just like stay up late and talk to her, and she'd be like, come on, why don't you just have sex with me? And he's like, no, not yet. And eventually she gets to the point where she realizes that Michael actually loves her for her, and because he took time to get to know her and wasn't just after sex like every other man was in her life. And then as a married couple, they were able to have sex as God intended, which is an expression of love. And it's not supposed to be like the idol for the man and say, oh, I love this woman because she gives me sex. Rather, sex is an expression of their love for each other. And so again, this whole story really taps into that desire in a woman to have a man who takes the time to get to know her and doesn't just want her for sex, because that is what most men want women for. They just want to have sex. And when a woman meets a man who actually wants her for her and gets to know her, that's what a woman wants. She wants to be known by the man. She doesn't just want a man to love her for any old reason. She wants to be loved because he sees her and loves what he sees. And then once a woman knows that her husband loves her for her, then she wants to have sex with him again, because it's an expression of the love they have for each other. And number 5, a woman wants a man who keeps pursuing her even after he discovers her problems. And so basically, this is like, if I was going to summarize all the points, I think this would be the point of why women love this movie and book so much, is because Michael's relentless pursuit, despite all the problems that he's seen in her. So, as he gets to know her, it's not like everything was hunky-dory and perfect. She keeps making mistakes. She keeps screwing up. She's not healed. And even when he's confronted with this difficult act of loving an imperfect person, he keeps doing it. He keeps pursuing. He keeps loving. And that's what women want, because one of the fears in them is that once they do open up to a man, they're afraid that the man will then reject her because of what they see. One phrase that I think captures the fear in women a lot is, I'm just too much, I'm just too much, or I'm not enough. It's kind of like saying the same thing, just on a different side of the coin. My history's too much. Got too many problems. I'm too much. Or I'm not enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't meet the standards of a woman that a man would want. I don't have the purity that I wish I could offer a man. I'm not enough. And so basically, it's this fear that once a man does pursue, she's going to be found out as a fake, as a fraud. And so she has this desire to either pretend to be something she's not, or just hide because she wants to be authentic, but she doesn't want to be pursued because she doesn't want the fear of rejection to occur in her life. So men, this is a great lesson that if you do find a woman that is expressing some of these fears, your call to action is to keep going. If you love her and she's got insecurities and fears, then you have to be the stable person and just keep going if you are that stable person. Because that's another thing I would like to highlight and kind of end this video on, is that Michael was a stable, strong man that was stable and strong without Angel. And so he wasn't going to her like every other man to find something, to take something. Rather, he was going to her to offer the strength that he already possessed, to offer the stability that he already had. And that's what women want in a man. They don't want a man to come to them and who like, make me feel strong, make me feel like a man, help me feel loved. They don't want that. They want a man who's like, I'm secure in my manhood because I know who I am in Christ. I would like to love you and make you my wife and offer you what I can offer you. And, you know, I'm like hyper generalizing it here, but that's the idea that women want. They want a man who's stable, not a man that they need to make stable themselves. And like I said throughout this video, none of us can do this perfectly. The whole point of the book was to highlight God, to highlight his perfection. And we need to remember that when we watch movies or read books like this is not possible for a human to do perfectly. Only Christ can do this. Michael Hosea is a representation of Christ, of God, not of a man that you're actually going to find on earth. Of course, we should seek to seek after that, to try to model after that. But let's all remember that only God can give us that perfect love that we all crave. So I've never done a video like this. I'm open to doing more things like this if the AGW community enjoyed it and found it helpful. So one way you can let me know if you like this and want more content like this is by tapping the thumbs up button and letting me know in the comment section. And here's a 4-part series more about the differences and desires of men and women through studying the book of Ruth and studying the relationship between Ruth and Boaz. So if you want to keep learning with me, this is a great 4-part series to do that. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. Hope this was helpful. Until next time, God bless.